God's story. Gideon. So part of God's story is about a man named Gideon, and it begins like this. Israel, God's special family, had turned against the one real God and worshipped idols. They had forgotten how God had loved and cared for them and needed a reminder that He was the one in charge. So God took away the Israelites' farms for 7 long years. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, God would let another nation called the Midianites sweep through and camp. Although his own family had forgotten him, God still loved them deeply. So, at the end of the 7 years, God appeared to a young Israelite named Gideon. God said He was going to free the Israelites with Gideon's help. Gideon, however, wasn't so sure, so he asked God to prove Himself by performing a series of miracles. Gideon said, "If the fleece is wet with dew in the morning but the ground is dry, then I will know that you're going to help me rescue Israel as you promised." That's what happened. Just to be sure, the next night, Gideon asked God to do the opposite, make the fleece dry and make the ground wet. And God did it. Next, He even sent a sign through an angel. Gideon was finally convinced that God was in his corner, so he called together an army to fight against the Midianites. Now, normally having lots of people is a good thing when you're about to battle, but like I said, God does things a bit differently. He told Gideon that the Israelites had too many soldiers. If they won now, God knew the Israelites would say it was because of their own strength and brag about it. So, God wanted Gideon to have a smaller army. Gideon was nervous, but he did as God asked, which is always a good idea, by the way. He told his men that if they were afraid, they could return home. With that, 22,000 soldiers left, leaving Gideon with about 10,000. For you math whizzes, that's 2/3 of his army just poof, gone. Even after all that, the army was still too big. So God told Gideon to take the soldiers down to the water to drink, and then send home the soldiers who drank out of the stream like dogs. Again, Gideon did what God asked and was now left with only 300 soldiers. God knew Gideon was probably worried, so He told him to sneak down to the enemy camp where Gideon heard soldiers talking about a crazy dream where a loaf of bread rolled into the Midianite camp and over their tent. One soldier said that could only mean that Gideon would triumph over them. Gideon returned to his own camp, confident that he would win the battle. He divided his men into 3 groups and gave them each a trumpet and a jar with a torch inside. Not usually what you bring to a fight, but God had a plan. Gideon's army reached the edge of the Midianite camp and then went into action. They blew their trumpets, smashed their jars, and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" And don't forget, they did all of this without a single weapon in their hands. Terrified, the Midianites fled, accidentally attacking each other as they went. In fact, they ran so far from the battlefield that other Israelites were able to capture and defeat the leaders of the Midianites. With the enemy leaders gone and their army running away, God had saved Israel, just like He said He would. And that's the story of Gideon. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Israel turned away from God. God reminded them He was in charge. God said He would save Israel. He would use Gideon. God performed miracles for Gideon. Gideon gathered an army. God made it smaller. Much smaller. Soldiers had a dream. Gideon's army surprised their enemies. The Midianites ran away. God used Gideon to save Israel. And that's a part of God's story.
My First Bible presents The Call of Gideon, Judges 6. After 40 peaceful years, the Israelites did what offended God again, which is to worship the false gods of the Canaanites. As a consequence, they fell under the oppression and domain of the Midianites for 7 years. The Israelites were having such a hard time that they had to run towards the mountains seeking refuge. There, they lived hiding in caves and in fortified spaces. Each time the Israelites tried to grow the fields, the Midianites, along with the Amalekites and other peoples of the east, went, plundered, and destroyed all of their crops, leaving them with nothing to eat. They also killed their livestock, their sheep, oxen, bulls, and donkeys. As a result, the Israelites were completely deprived from animals and resources. These Midianites, together with their Amalekite allies and other peoples of the east, were camping near the Israelites with the intention of harming them. Both them and their camels were too many, so much that they looked like a locust infestation. The misery of the Israelites was such because of the Midianites that they cried out to God asking for help. God heard his people, and seeing their suffering, sent them a prophet who told them, "I bring a message from God to you. The Lord says, I took you out from Egypt, land of slavery, and freed you of its power. I also freed you from the power of all your oppressors to give your land back to you. I told them, I am Lord, your God. Do not worship false gods, the ones the Amorites worship, in which land you live. But you decided not to obey. You chose to worship false gods. You chose not to obey." And that way, the Israelites sadly had to face the consequences of having made the wrong choice. But God, for his mercy, had a plan to free them. In a place called Ophrah, the angel of the Lord showed up and sat under a tree, which belonged to Joash of the tribe of Manasseh. Joash's son, his name was Gideon. He was cleaning the wheat in place and hid it to protect it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord presented itself before Gideon, it told him, "The Lord is with you, brave warrior." "What do you mean the Lord is with me? How could you say that?" Gideon answered. "Don't you see how we are living? Don't you know that we have to live hiding from the Midianites? If the Lord is with me, then why is all of this happening to us? Where are those stories our parents used to tell us about when they said, 'God took us out of Egypt. God freed his people'? The truth is that God has abandoned us and has handed us to the Midianites." The Lord faced Gideon and told him, "You, with the bravery and strength you hold, will save Israel from the power of Midian." "Me? But Lord, how will I save Israel? My troop is the weakest from the Manasseh tribe, and I'm the smartest of my family." The Lord answered, "You will defeat the Midianites as if they were just a single man, because I will be by your side." "Okay. If you will be with me, then I need proof that it is you who I'm talking to," Gideon answered. I will bring my offer and offering, and I will put it before you, but I need to prepare it, so please don't leave until I come back." "I will wait for you here," the Lord said. Gideon rushed to prepare a kid and used flour to make unleavened bread. Once he had everything ready, he took the unleavened bread, placed the meat in a basket, and the meat stock in a pot. And then he took it where the angel was. God's angel told him to place the meat in the unleavened bread on a rock that was there, and then to spill the meat stock on it. So he did. So, with the tip of the stick he was carrying, the Lord's angel touched the meat, unleavened bread. And suddenly, fire came out of the rock, which consumed the meat and all of the bread there. Then the angel of the Lord disappeared from his sight.
Bye.
When Gideon realized it was the Lord, he exclaimed, "Oh my! I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face!" But the Lord told him, "Do not fear, you won't die, be in peace." At that moment, Gideon built there an altar for God and called it Jehovah Shalom, which means the Lord is peace. That same night, God told him, "Take a bull from your father's herd. Pick the second one, the one who is 7 years old. Your task will be to tear down the altar your father dedicated to Baal, as the wooden post with the Asherah image which is next to him. Then, using Asherah wood, you will offer the bull that you took as a holocaust." Gideon heard every instruction coming from God. That way, he did as the Lord had told him. But he did it at night, since he was afraid of his family and the men of the city. There, with 10 of his servants, they destroyed the altar devoted to Baal. And Asherah made it little bit, turned it into wood, and with it offered God a holocaust with the bull of his father. The morning after, when they realized, "This can't be true. What has happened here?" "What have you done with Baal?"